September 1966. A small fishing boat drifts along a remote Pacific island when the crew spots something uncanny, patches of burnt grass on sheer green cliffs. Then, out of nowhere, a wild-haired boy plunges from the rocks into the sea, followed by others yelling at the top of their lungs. Within moments, a teenager clambers aboard the boat and shouts in perfect English, "My name is Stephen. There are 6 of us, and we reckon we've been here 15 months." These 6 youths, long given up for dead, had somehow survived alone on an uninhabited island for over a year. This is the incredible true story of how 6 Tongan schoolboys, through teamwork, ingenuity, and unbreakable spirit, endured 15 months as castaways on a deserted island. It all began in June 1965 in the South Pacific Kingdom of Tonga. 6 teenage boys, Luke Vekoso, Stephen Tavita Fatai Latu, Sione Fatawa, David Tavita Siola A, Kolo Fekitoa, and Mano Sione Felipe Totau, were classmates at a strict Anglican boarding school in Nuku'alofa, the Tongan capital. Ranging from about 13 to 18 years old, they shared an adventurous spirit and a growing restlessness with regimented school life. Day after day, they toiled through prayers and plain meals at St. Andrew's School, dreaming of escape and exploring the wider world beyond their small island nation. Finally, the boys hatched a daring plan. They would borrow a boat and sail away to Fiji, or even all the way to New Zealand, hundreds of miles from home. They knew it was risky and barely made any preparations, just 2 sacks of bananas, a few coconuts, and a small gas stove. But youthful confidence and boredom drove them on. One evening, under the cover of darkness, the group snuck down to the harbor. There, moored at the dock, was a 24-foot wooden fishing boat belonging to a local fisherman named Taniela Uhila. The boys disliked Uhila and figured he wouldn't miss his boat until morning. Heart pounding with excitement, they untied the vessel and pushed off into the calm sea. A gentle breeze filled the sail as they left behind the twinkling lights of Nuku'alofa, giddy with the thrill of freedom. None of them imagined the peril that lay ahead. Their ill-planned adventure took a dark turn that very first night. Hours after departure, the weather abruptly shifted. A fierce tropical storm rolled in, the wind howling and waves towering in the darkness. Rain pelted down as the boys struggled to control the boat. In their inexperience, they failed to lower the sail in time. The gusts tore it to shreds, and soon the rudder snapped off as well. The little boat was now utterly at the mercy of the storm. Lightning flashed, and the young crew huddled in terror as their stolen vessel was tossed about. At some point, the anchor line parted, leaving them adrift on the open ocean. Water poured in with each wave, and the boys frantically bailed with their hands, fighting to keep the craft afloat through the long, chaotic night. When dawn broke, the storm had blown itself out, but the 6 teenagers found themselves lost at sea, sails and rudder gone, utterly disoriented. For the next 8 days, the group drifted aimlessly across the vast Pacific with no land in sight. Under the searing tropical sun, they quickly ran out of their meager food and fresh water. Parched with thirst, they used tin cans to catch any rainwater they could whenever a rare drizzle fell. Some of the boys began to cry in despair. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. By the 6th and 7th days adrift, they were extremely weak and dehydrated. They took turns scooping out seawater leaking into the hull, trying to keep hope alive. "I was worried we might die," Mano recalled of that desperate time. Still, the tight-knit friends encouraged each other to hold on. They prayed together on the cramped boat, asking for salvation in the empty ocean. On day 8, as the sun climbed on the morning horizon, one of the boys cried out, "Land!" Sure enough, a faint outline of an island appeared far in the distance. With no means of steering, they let the winds and currents carry them slowly closer over the course of that day. By nightfall, the raft-like wreck was approaching the island's rocky shore. The place was Ata, a volcanic speck about 100 miles from where they'd set out. Unbeknownst to the boys, Ata was uninhabited. It had been abandoned a century earlier after a devastating episode in Tonga's history. In 1863, a Peruvian slave ship had raided Ata, kidnapping the island's entire native population. Since that dark day, the island stood deserted and largely forgotten. Now, in 1965, fate had led 6 starving castaways to this forbidden refuge. Late that night, the damaged boat struck an outer reef off Atta's coast and began to break apart. The exhausted teens knew they had to get to shore, but jagged rocks and churning surf made it perilous. Mano Totau, the oldest at about 18, took charge. Despite his own fatigue, he volunteered to go first and secure a safe landing. "We have to say a prayer first," Mano told his friends, and together in the dark they offered a final plea for protection. Then, Mano plunged into the Black Sea. He fought through strong currents and crashing waves, making for the faint outline of the beach. Every stroke was agony. He was so weak from 8 days without food or water that the whole world seemed to spin around him. At last, his feet touched sand. Collapsing on the shore, he tried to stand, but his legs failed. Still, he managed to pull himself up beyond the tide line. He felt dry grass under his fingers and cried out as loud as he could back toward the boat. "I'm here! I made it!" Hearing Mano's shout, the others mustered their remaining strength. One after another, the 5 boys abandoned the wreck and swam for their lives, clinging to bits of floating debris. It took all night and well into the next day for all of them to reach land. Some only managed by clutching planks from the disintegrating boat and paddling ashore over many hours. But by the next evening, miraculously, all 6 friends stood together on the shores of Atta Island, alive. They were skeletal, sunburnt, and dehydrated, but alive. Overjoyed and relieved, the first thing they did as a group on solid ground was kneel in the sand and say a prayer of thanks for surviving the sea. The immediate concern now was basic survival. The boys had nothing but the tattered clothes on their backs, and some had even lost those to the waves, and a few remaining scraps salvaged from the boat. That first night on the island, desperate for water, they managed to catch a seabird and drink its blood to slake their burning thirst. They also found a few seabird eggs to swallow raw. These provided just enough sustenance to keep them from collapse. For shelter, they dug out a small cave in the sand and earth by hand, burrowing into a hillside to escape the elements. Huddled together in their makeshift cave, the 6 castaways collapsed into a deep sleep for the first time in over a week, the sound of the ocean surf roaring outside. They had escaped the storm and the sea, but now found themselves marooned on a deserted island with an uncertain road to survival ahead. Dawn on their first full day on Atta brought a mix of hope and harsh reality. The morning sun revealed the island to be rugged but lush. Atta was a volcanic island ringed by steep cliffs and rocky beaches with a high forested plateau at its center. The castaway boys awoke sore and thirsty, but thankful to feel solid ground beneath them. Their immediate priority was water. Mano led the group inland, climbing up toward the dense green interior in search of fresh water or edible plants. As they scrambled up the slope, barefoot and weak, Mano stepped on a piece of soggy wood on the ground. Instinctively, he lifted it and squeezed water from the wet wood into his mouth, the first fresh water any of them had tasted in 8 days. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spur them onward. Reaching the top of the island, the boys gazed out over the tree canopy and the endless ocean beyond. In that moment, despite their hunger and uncertainty, they felt a surge of hope. They were alive on dry land, and that alone was a blessing after their ordeal at sea. Reality set in quickly. There were no other humans on this island to help them. They truly were on their own. If they wanted to survive, they would have to rely on their wits and each other. Gathering everyone together, the teenagers agreed to work as a team and face this challenge with determination. They remembered stories of Robinson Crusoe and survival skills they'd heard about. Right away, they began dividing tasks amongst themselves, a pattern that would define their stay on Atta. In their new world, water was life. The boys soon discovered that rainwater was their best hope for a steady supply. Using their hands and sharp rocks, they hollowed out the trunks of palm trees to make rustic cisterns. Whenever rain fell, the natural bowls would fill, yielding precious fresh water that they guarded carefully. For times when rain was sparse and their reserves ran low, the castaways resorted to extreme measures. They continued to hunt seabirds on the cliffs, not only for meat, but also for fluid. On a few desperate occasions, they had to drink the blood of seabirds to stay hydrated, a grisly practice, but one that likely saved their lives when no other water was available. Food was another constant concern. At first, the island seemed barren of easy food. There were no fruit trees by the beach, and certainly no stocked pantry. So the boys turned to the ocean and the island's wild flora and fauna. With impressive ingenuity, they crafted makeshift tools from the debris of their wreck and the island's resources. They fashioned fish hooks from scrap metal and spears from sharpened sticks, and became adept at fishing in the coastal shallows. The surrounding sea was teeming with life. Before long, they were pulling in fish, catching crabs and crayfish, lobsters by hand at low tide, and even trapping seabirds for meat. On land, the boys foraged whatever edible plants they could find. Luckily, Atta had been left untouched by humans for decades, which meant nature had flourished. In one stroke of fortune, they stumbled upon wild stands of taro root, a starchy, potato-like plant high in calories, likely descendants of crops once planted by the island's former inhabitants. With no pigs or people to dig them up in all those years, taro roots were abundant in the forests. The boys dug them up and learned to roast or boil them once they had fire, turning taro into a dietary staple. After a few days, they also found papaya trees and coconut palms, enjoying the tropical fruits and vital nutrients they provided. The biggest breakthrough in their food quest came about 3 months into their stay. As the group grew stronger, they decided to explore deeper into the island's interior. Climbing for 2 days through dense jungle and up into the high crater at the center of Atta, the boys made a stunning discovery: the overgrown ruins of an abandoned village. This was Colomale, the ghost village left behind after the 1860s slave raid. Among the remnants of long-ago habitation were banana trees laden with fruit, untended but still thriving, and clusters of feral chickens clucking in the underbrush. It must have felt like stumbling into a lost Eden. The boys realized these chickens were likely descendants of domestic fowl that had been living wild since the island was evacuated over a century earlier. With some effort, they managed to catch the feral chickens, providing them with a new source of meat and eggs. They also started tending a small garden in the fertile volcanic soil, planting some wild taro cuttings and banana shoots to increase their food supply. By reviving the old village gardens of Colomale, the resourceful teens transformed their situation. From mere scavengers, they became settlers on the island, coaxing sustenance from the land itself. One of the Tongan castaways sits atop a cliff on the deserted island of Atta in 1966, scanning the horizon. The boys often climbed high points like this, watching for any ship that might pass by and rescue them. During those first weeks, one of the hardest challenges was living without fire. At night, temperatures dropped and they had no reliable way to boil water or cook the taro and fish they gathered. The 6 boys knew they needed fire for long-term survival, so they never stopped trying to start one. Day after day, despite weakness and failure, they persisted, using a traditional method they'd heard of: the fire plow technique, rubbing a hardwood stick vigorously in a groove of soft wood to generate an ember. Finally, after what they later estimated was 3 months on the island, their hard work paid off. Stephen, who would later become an engineer, succeeded in coaxing a tiny ember to life using 2 sticks. The spark was nurtured into a flame, and for the first time the castaways enjoyed a hot meal of cooked fish and roast taro, a feast hard won after months of cold foraging. From that moment on, the fire became their most treasured possession. The boys kept it burning continuously for over a year, never once letting it go out during their entire exile. Tending the fire became a rotating duty, day and night, rain or shine. The fire provided warmth, boiled their drinking water, cooked their food, and even served as a constant signal for help, its smoke visible to any passing ship. On cliff sides, they burned patches of grass to attract attention from afar. That persistent column of smoke would eventually be one of the clues that led to their salvation. With food and fire slowly under control, the teenagers turned to creating a proper shelter. They refused to live like animals. They wanted a home on the island. Using only their hands, rocks, and an old knife blade from the wreck, the boys cut down branches and gathered wide palm fronds. Under Kolo's guidance, he was particularly skilled in traditional crafts. They painstakingly wove coconut palm fronds into panels of thatch. It took Mano about 2 weeks to weave enough palm mats for walls. They selected a flat spot and built a hut from scratch, Sturdy tree trunks formed the frame, palm thatch became the walls and roof, and they even engineered an indoor fire pit for cooking. For bedding, they cut large banana leaves and piled them thickly to make soft mattresses on the hut floor. In the end, their shelter was snug and water-resistant, capable of withstanding the tropical rainstorms and the cyclone season's gales. At night, as rain drummed on the thatch roof, the 6 friends could huddle around their warm fire inside the hut, sharing stories and comfort. In a very real sense, they turned the wilderness into a home. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the boys' survival was how they formed a miniature society that emphasized order, mutual respect, and support. Early on, they realized that chaos or conflict could be deadly in their situation, so they agreed on rules to keep everyone working together. They split into pairs, with each pair assigned specific responsibilities on a rotating schedule. For instance, 2 would tend the garden and gather fruit, 2 handled cooking and fire maintenance, and 2 stood guard to watch for ships or handle any urgent needs. This division of labor ensured that every boy had a purpose each day, and no one was overburdened or left idle. The 2 oldest boys naturally took on leadership roles. One became the group's informal captain for practical matters, organizing work, making repair plans, while the other acted as a spiritual and emotional leader, leading prayers and keeping morale up. Together, these youthful leaders provided stability and direction, but all decisions of importance were discussed among the group. It was a cooperative effort at heart. Maintaining emotional health was as important as finding food. To combat loneliness and fear, the boys established comforting rituals. Every morning and evening, they would gather to pray together, asking for strength and eventual rescue. They also found solace in music and games. Using what little they had, the boys even managed to construct a crude guitar, more like a ukulele, a piece of driftwood for the body, half a coconut shell as a soundbox, and steel wires from the boat for strings. With this makeshift instrument, they sang songs under the stars at night. In fact, they composed 5 original songs during their 15-month stay. Singing and harmonizing in their native Tongan language helped keep their spirits up through the long, dark nights. They played games and even crafted a form of a gym to stay fit. Using a sturdy branch and heavy stones, they set up a bench press station to exercise, turning survival into a sort of daily routine that included recreation. In short, they nurtured not just their bodies, but also their minds and hearts, warding off despair with friendship and faith. To survive 15 months in isolation, the Tongan castaways relied on a combination of clever resourcefulness and solid teamwork. Some of their most ingenious strategies included capturing water. They carved out hollow tree trunks to catch and store rainwater, creating natural cisterns that provided a steady drinking supply. During droughts, they weren't above using coconut fluid or even seabird blood as emergency hydration. They foraged wild taro roots and tropical fruits like papaya and coconut to supplement their diet. Discovering the old village's banana grove and feral chickens allowed them to start a mini farm, tending a garden and keeping captured chickens for eggs and meat. Surrounded by ocean, the boys became skilled fishermen. With homemade hooks and spears from scrap metal and wood, they caught fish, lobsters, and shellfish to eat. On land, they set traps for seabirds and hunted the island's birds, using every part for nourishment, even drinking raw eggs and blood when needed. Once they succeeded in making fire by friction, they never let it die out. The fire burned day and night for over a year, giving them cooked food, safe water, warmth, and a continuous smoke signal to attract rescue. With no modern tools, they built a sturdy hut from palm fronds and wood to shelter them from rain and tropical cyclones. They also dug latrines and enforced strict cleanliness around their camp, understanding the importance of hygiene to prevent disease. They organized themselves into teams and shared duties evenly, whether it was guarding the fire, harvesting food, or scanning the sea for ships. A rotating schedule kept everyone busy and accountable, leaving no room for boredom or dissent. Remarkably, the 6 teenagers resolved disputes with maturity far beyond their years. If tempers flared or an argument broke out, they instituted a rule. The quarreling parties had to separate and cool off at opposite ends of the beach. After a little time apart, they would reunite and talk through the issue calmly. This simple time-out system kept their camp harmony intact, preventing small disagreements from exploding in the high-stress environment. The group sustained not just their bodies, but their humanity. They even held makeshift funerals for any birds they had to kill for food, a gesture of respect that helped them remember their values. They supported each other emotionally, praying, singing, and joking together daily to fend off depression. This camaraderie and empathy were as crucial to survival as any bushcraft skill. One dramatic example of their cohesion came a few months into their stay. One of the boys, Stephen, slipped and fell from a cliff, badly breaking his leg. It was a grave situation. A severe injury in such conditions could easily turn fatal. But the other 5 immediately sprang into action. Drawing on basic first aid knowledge, they improvised a splint using sticks and leaves to set Stephen's leg. They fashioned crutches for him and took on his duties while he healed. Over the following weeks, the group made sure Stephen was never left alone. They brought him food, kept him clean, and encouraged him daily. Incredibly, the broken leg mended true. Stephen recovered fully under his friend's care. This episode showcased the boys' ingenuity in medicine and, more importantly, their devotion to one another. Had they not worked together selflessly, Stephen might not have survived his injury. But on this island, each boy's life was entrusted to the others, and they never forgot that. Despite their impressive adaptation, life on Otta was far from easy or pleasant. The boys endured fierce tropical storms that lashed the island, hunkering down in their cave or hut as wind and rain hammered the cliffs. They experienced gnawing hunger when supplies ran short or fishing was poor. There were days of intense homesickness when the reality of their isolation sank in. "We were not happy where we were," Mano admitted later of their mental state. "No matter how beautiful the island or how bountiful their garden, nothing could replace the comfort of family or the security of civilization." Some evenings, one of them would break down in tears, missing their parents, or wondering if anyone out there even knew they were alive. During those low moments, the others provided comfort, a hand on the shoulder, a shared prayer, or a rousing song to lift spirits. Hope was their most important sustenance. "I lived in the hope that something would happen, that something good would come tomorrow," Mano reflected of that time. Day after day, the 6 friends reassured each other that eventually they would go home. At one point, about a month into their castaway life, the boys attempted a bold escape plan. Restless and eager to take fate into their own hands, they decided to build a raft and try to sail for help. They spent days chopping down large trees, using fire to weaken the bases, and lashing logs together with vines. When the crude raft was ready, they pushed it into the surf and climbed aboard, hoping the currents might carry them to a populated island. But the sea had other ideas. The raft was battered by waves and began to come apart almost immediately, forcing the boys to abandon it and swim back to shore before they were dragged out to sea. Disappointed but alive, they recognized that escape by their own means was too dangerous. After that, they doubled down on surviving on Otta and keeping a signal fire burning, resigning themselves to wait for rescue by chance. It was a hard lesson in patience. They had to trust that someday, someone would stumble upon them. And so the days turned to weeks, the weeks to months. The changing seasons brought cooler weather, then heat, as 1965 rolled into 1966. Through it all, the 6 castaways maintained their remarkable little community. They celebrated Christmas 1965 together on the island, likely marking the holiday with a prayer and perhaps a special treat of bananas or roast bird if they had it. They lost exact track of time, but they never lost sight of their shared goal: get everyone home alive. Their hair grew out into wild manes, and their clothes tattered away until they mostly wore makeshift loincloths or went nude island style. Yet in their hearts they remained the same polite, church-going Tongan boys they had been taught to be. Each night before sleeping, they sang a hymn or softly hummed a lullaby from back home. Unbeknownst to them, back in Tonga, their families had long since feared the worst. Funerals were held for the missing boys after search efforts failed. The community mourned their loss, and even the king of Tonga made a note of the tragedy of the lost schoolboys. Only Mano's father, as Mano later learned, refused to believe his son was gone. He held out hope in his heart that somehow Mano was still alive out there. That faith would prove justified. By the late summer of 1966, the castaways had endured an astonishing 15 months on the island. They did not know it had been that long. To them, it felt like time had blurred. They only knew it had been a very long time, perhaps over a year. They had settled into a routine but never stopped scanning the horizon. Then, one fateful day, their vigil was rewarded. On September 11, 1966, the boys were going about their usual tasks when one of them, Stephen, thought he spotted an unfamiliar object on the water's edge. As he looked harder, his heart leapt. It was the sight of a ship's mast and a tiny plume of smoke on the horizon. A boat. A boat was approaching Atta. He shouted to the others, and together the six climbed to a high vantage point. Sure enough, there was a small fishing vessel cautiously circling the island's coast. Excitement and anxiety exploded among the group. After over a year of isolation, was this finally salvation, or were their eyes deceiving them? Down on that fishing boat, the crew had indeed noticed signs of life on the supposedly uninhabited island. The vessel was an Australian fishing boat named the Just David, captained by Peter Warner, and they were in Tongan waters hunting for lobster. Captain Warner had passed by Atta when he noticed burned patches on the green cliffs, an odd sight on a deserted island that made him curious. Drawing nearer, he saw smoke and what looked like human figures on the beach. Warner's crew initially hesitated. They had heard stories that sometimes convicts or pirates were marooned on remote islands. Could this be a dangerous trap? The boys on shore, with their matted hair and scant clothing, looked wild and ragged. Unsure what to expect, Warner approached carefully. Then, before the fishermen could even launch a dinghy, one of the castaways dove straight into the sea and began swimming frantically toward the boat. It was Stephen. Despite having broken his leg months before, he was now strong and determined, cutting through the water with powerful strokes. Behind him, the other five stood on the rocks, jumping and whooping for joy, calling out in English that they were from Tonga. Captain Warner peered through his binoculars at the spectacle. Naked teenagers with long, bushy hair yelling at the top of their lungs. Unsure whether to be alarmed or elated, he had his crew stand by with rifles just in case, but allowed the first swimmer to come alongside. Stephen, reaching the Just David, pulled himself up the rope ladder and onto the deck. Soaking wet and trembling with emotion, the boy looked Captain Warner in the eye and spoke the words the captain would never forget. "My name is Stephen. There are 6 of us, and we reckon we've been here for between 1 and 2 years." Warner was stunned. The story sounded unbelievable, yet here stood the proof in front of him. Within minutes, the rest of the boys had swum out and clambered aboard. The crew quickly realized these were not hostile castaways, but desperate survivors, extremely excited and speaking polite English. The boys, out of breath and overjoyed, insisted they were students from Nuku'alofa who had been lost at sea since 1965. To verify their claims, Captain Warner grabbed his two-way radio. He took down the boys' names, Mano, Stephen, Kolo, David, Luke, and Sione, and radioed the operator in Nuku'alofa, Tonga's capital. "I have 6 boys here," he reported. "They say they've been shipwrecked on Atta for over a year." There was a long pause on the other end. 20 minutes went by as the castaways and the crew waited anxiously for a reply. Those minutes felt like hours. Finally, the radio crackled back to life. The operator's voice was tearful and astonished. "You found them. These boys have been given up for dead. Funerals have been held. If it's really them, this is a miracle." Upon hearing this confirmation, a wave of emotion rolled over everyone on deck. The 6 rescued youths laughed, cried, and hugged one another, and the bewildered but moved fishermen. "I could not explain how we felt. We were all full of tears, happy, like we walked through heaven," Mano later said of that miraculous moment. After 15 months of praying for deliverance, their prayers had been answered. Once it was clear the boys were indeed legitimate missing persons, Captain Warner's crew welcomed them fully. They hauled the tired teenagers aboard properly, giving them food, water, and clothes or blankets to cover themselves. Amusingly, after so long on island fare, the boys had trouble digesting the rich Western food. Their first meal on the Just David made a couple of them sick until their stomachs readjusted. But that was a small hiccup in an otherwise euphoric reunion. Warner was amazed at the boys' condition. Despite their ordeal, they were healthy, strong, and in good spirits. Aside from a few scars and the one mended broken leg, they had no serious ailments, a testament to how well they had managed their survival. Before departing the area, Captain Warner took Stephen and a couple of the boys back to retrieve what they could from Atta. The 6 castaways guided the fishermen up to their campsite, proudly showing them the neat little world they had built, the fire still crackling in its pit, the huts, the gardens of taro and bananas, even a long-forgotten cooking pot they'd found and used. One can only imagine the crew's astonishment at seeing how these teenagers had not only survived, but truly lived on this island, recreating a semblance of civilization. The boys gathered a few keepsakes, perhaps their handmade guitar or a journal if they had one, and then said goodbye to their island home. For all the hardships it had brought, Atta had kept them alive and forged an unbreakable brotherhood among them. The Just David then set sail for Nuku'alofa, carrying the rescued boys back to their people. As the boat neared Tonga's capital, word spread like wildfire. The wharf was crowded with anxious family members, villagers, and officials, eager to see this impossible homecoming. When the 6 young men stepped ashore, a tremendous cheer and wailing of joy erupted. Mothers, fathers, siblings rushed to embrace them, tears streaming. They were sons returned from the dead. The entire country rejoiced. In a time before instant news, this rescue was a sensation passed from person to person, a rare, joyous miracle. The boys later recounted that the celebrations in their honor lasted for 3 days straight. One day of feasting and thanksgiving was hosted by their families, another by their church community, and a third by local island authorities. Everyone wanted to fete the heroic youth who had survived against all odds. The King of Tonga himself reportedly greeted them and thanked Captain Warner personally. Banners were hung, church choirs sang hymns of gratitude, and a special service of thanksgiving was held for the boys' safe return. It was likely the happiest moment of their lives. Yet amid the celebrations came a startling reminder of the boys' youthful mischief. Within days of their return, the 6 were arrested and briefly jailed in Nuku'alofa. The charge? Stealing the boat back in 1965. The boat's owner, Mr. Uhila, whose vessel they had indeed taken and wrecked, was furious about his loss and insisted on pressing charges despite their incredible story. It was a sour note after such a miraculous survival. When Captain Peter Warner heard that his young friends had failed to show up to a welcome party on his boat because they were sitting in a jail cell, he took action. Determined to help the boys who had come to trust him, Warner negotiated a deal with Tonga's authorities and Mr. Uhila. Warner arranged with Australia's Channel 7 television network to buy the exclusive rights to the Castaways story for the sum of £150, around $200 in 1966 value. He turned over this money to Mr. Uhila to pay for a new boat. Presented with compensation, the fishermen agreed to drop the charges, and the 6 boys were released. In effect, their freedom was purchased by the retelling of their adventure. Channel 7 wasted no time. Within weeks, a TV crew flew to Tonga to document the astonishing tale of survival. They even sailed back to Atta Island with the boys and Captain Warner to film a reenactment of key moments. The result was a television documentary titled The Castaways, aired in October 1966, that captivated audiences in Australia. Black and white footage shows the boys, fit and smiling, demonstrating how they climbed the cliffs, started fire, and lived on the island. This early documentary turned the Tongan castaways into minor celebrities and helped recoup some money for them and for Warner through media appearances. Captain Warner, for his part, had grown very fond of the 6 lads. He saw potential in their seafaring skills and camaraderie. After their rescue, he offered them jobs as crew on his fishing boat. Amazingly, all 6 accepted. The boys who had once run away to see the world now had a legitimate chance to do so. Under Warner's mentorship, they spent the next few years crewing aboard a new fishing vessel, which Peter Warner reportedly named the Atta after their island. This unexpected turn fulfilled the boys' original teenage dream, to escape Tonga and have an adventure, Now they sailed to Fiji, Australia, and beyond, working, earning money, and seeing the wider world under the guidance of the very man who had saved them. In gratitude for saving the boys, Tonga's king Taufa'ahau IV granted Peter Warner a special royal concession to harvest lobsters in Tongan waters, an enormous gesture of thanks that helped Warner's fishing business and cemented his friendship with the kingdom. More meaningfully, Warner's relationship with the 6 former castaways deepened into genuine familial love. He became a close friend, even a father figure, especially to Mano Totau, who later said, "He's like a father to me," when speaking of Warner. The bond forged in those extraordinary circumstances lasted a lifetime. In the decades after 1966, each of the 6 Tongan castaways went on to live full lives. Some emigrated to Australia or New Zealand, others stayed in Tonga. They rarely spoke publicly of their ordeal. It was a profound, even traumatic memory that they shared mostly among themselves. Mano Totau, for example, settled quietly in Australia and didn't seek fame or attention. It wasn't until years later, in the 2000s, that their story resurfaced globally and drew renewed interest. A Dutch historian, Rutger Bregman, wrote about the castaways as a shining example of human cooperation in his 2020 book, Humankind, A Hopeful History. Media outlets picked up the real Lord of the Flies angle, drawing contrast with William Golding's famous novel, which these boys' story starkly contradicts. Suddenly, more than 50 years after the rescue, the surviving castaways found themselves in the spotlight again. Mano Totau, at age 73, gave interviews in 2020, astonished that people around the world were so fascinated by what he and his friends had endured as teenagers. With the renewed fame, some controversies emerged. Members of the Tongan and Pacific Islander community voiced concerns that early retellings of the story focused too much on the white Australian rescuer's perspective, Peter Warner, instead of the voices of the Tongan survivors themselves. They noted that accounts often glossed over or cursory mentioned the painful history of slavery that left Atta deserted, a history deeply significant to Pacific Islanders. In Bregman's article, for example, the 1863 slave raid on Atta was referenced only briefly, which some felt downplayed the gravity of that tragedy that set the stage for the boys' experience. Others pointed out that Captain Warner had profited from selling the rights to the boys' story back in 1966 to fund the boat repayment, and they questioned whether it was right for an outsider to benefit from a very Polynesian story of resilience. For his part, Mano Totau strongly defended his captain and friend. He publicly said he did not begrudge Warner any money made from the story. "If not for Mr. Warner, we never survive. If he makes some money from it, good luck to him. Please, everybody, shut up," Mano said bluntly in response to Warner's critics. To Mano, what mattered was that Warner had saved their lives and remained a loyal friend. Still, Mano expressed his own desire to eventually tell the full story in his own words, perhaps by writing a book, so that he could pass something on to his grandchildren and ensure the Tongan perspective was preserved. Today, the legacy of the 6 Tongan castaways lives on as an inspiring example of human cooperation and resilience. Their story has been featured in books and documentaries and even caught Hollywood's eye. In 2020, a major film studio acquired the rights to develop a feature film about their adventure. Decades later, one of the survivors, Kolo Fekitoa, actually returned to Atta with an explorer for a short stay, reliving the survival experience for a new documentary. But most of all, the tale of these 6 boys has traveled the world as a beacon of hope. In an era rife with stories of conflict and self-interest, here was a real-life case where friendship, faith, and teamwork allowed a group of children to overcome extreme adversity. It challenges assumptions about how people might behave in desperate situations and shows that even young people, when given no other choice, can organize themselves with astonishing wisdom and care. The climax of this story was not a dramatic battle or tragic end, but a joyful reunion, the moment the boys were found and brought home safely. Unlike many castaway tales of history, this one did not end in tragedy or violence. Instead, it built to a climax of pure human joy and relief. families reunited, an island kingdom celebrating, and 6 boys embarking on the rest of their lives forever bound by an incredible chapter they wrote together. The conflict they overcame was nature itself, hunger, thirst, isolation, and they defeated it through unity and ingenuity. In reflecting on the saga of the Tongan castaways, one cannot help but feel a sense of awe. These were schoolboys, mere teenagers, yet they managed to do something many seasoned adults might fail at: survive completely alone in the wild for over a year with no training or tools, and all 6 made it out alive and well. Their story is a testament to the strength of community and cooperation. When one boy was down, the others lifted him up. When resources were scarce, they shared everything equally. When disagreements occurred, they found ways to resolve them peacefully for the greater good. Far from descending into chaos, they built a society of hope and order on that lonely island. Their instinct was not to turn on each other, but to care for each other, and that made all the difference. Historically grounded and true, this account stands as a hopeful counterpoint to fictional tales of castaways turning savage. In the face of dire circumstances, these 6 youths proved that compassion and collaboration can triumph over fear and desperation. They kept their humanity intact, even at times showing empathy for the animals they had to kill to survive, and in some ways came out of the ordeal better people than when they entered it. As Mano reflected later in life, "When I think back to our time on the island, I realize we really learned a lot. I think I learned more on the island. I learned how to trust myself, and that if you're in a real problem, you will eventually see what you need to do to survive." Their unintended adventure taught them self-reliance, resilience, and the power of friendship, lessons that no classroom could have imparted so vividly. 50-plus years later, the surviving members of the group, now elders in their 70s, still share a special bond. They are living witnesses to an extraordinary event that has inspired countless people around the globe. The Tongan castaways' 15-month journey is more than just a survival story. It is a profound reminder of human beings' capacity for goodness and cooperation under extreme pressure. In a world often focused on conflict, their experience shows that with unity, ingenuity, faith, and a bit of luck, ordinary people, even children, can achieve the extraordinary. If this inspiring true story of survival and friendship moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more documentary-style deep dives into remarkable historical events. Share this story with others to spread the message of hope and resilience. What do you find most astonishing about the Tongan castaways' ordeal? Is it their ingenious survival skills, their unwavering teamwork, or something else? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember to cherish the power of cooperation and human spirit in your own life.